Bitcoin has risen roughly 13% in the last 5 days amid excitement around spot Bitcoin ETFs. Joining us now to discuss the crypto market is Banríon Capital Management Chief Investment Strategist, Victoria Bills. Welcome back, Victoria.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me.
Glad to see you again. So, as we said just now a second ago, a lot of excitement around the ETF, and that seems to be what's spurring it. Do you think that that's really the case, or any other factors involved here?
I definitely think the spot ETF is playing a factor in the current spike that we're seeing in Bitcoin price, especially since it was originally, when we first started talking, around like 29K, and now it's up almost close to 34, spiking at 35 almost a couple of days ago. That definitely has a factor to it. And when you think about also what's going on in the U.S. markets and the macroeconomic environment right now, Bitcoin is up relative to U.S. stocks. And a lot of that has to do with what's happening right now with the Treasury yield and that playing a factor in the bond market. As I've talked about very previously in other segments, crypto tends to trade in an inverse correlation to stock markets and into stock markets particularly. So when stocks are down, Bitcoin seems to be up. And if we look at the year-to-date price, we're seeing that crypto is up almost 100%, whereas if you would invest it in the S&P 500, it's about 7.8 or almost 8% year-to-date. So if someone is looking for opportunity to invest, crypto, honestly, if you had started at the beginning of the year, would have been the better bet.
That would be if we started at the beginning of the year. Of course, hindsight is 2020, and here we are now. Looking though at higher interest rates at a time when inflation is not at 10% anymore. It's definitely under control, and we're almost to the point where the risk-free rate less inflation is almost a couple of percent here. Nonetheless, that's a higher hurdle rate for risky returns. So what happens? I mean, like it kind of seems rather counterintuitive to see stocks go down when rates are up at the same time Bitcoin going up when rates are up. When you would say, well, stocks are risky, Bitcoin's risky, rates are up, that means you need a higher return. How does that work? I mean, it's not an inflation play, that's for sure.
Definitely not an inflation play, but the way that it typically works, if we're looking at, again, macroeconomic factors. So inflation was at around 10% if we're looking at close to 2022, or even now I believe inflation is close to around like the 3% marker, which is close to what the Fed's target rate is. The Fed is going to do everything in its power to try and get that inflation down to 2%. And the levers that they have to pull for that is by increasing interest rates. Increased interest rates means increased yields on bonds. When bond prices go up, that means that the cost of borrowing goes up for not only just the average consumer, but also for companies as well. So when companies are essentially facing those high rates the same way that we are, just for cost of borrowing to do R&D, there's a lot of things that can come in play. But what we're seeing in the stock market right now is corporations have record shareholder profits. And essentially what that has translated into, in short, is that they've passed on that cost of borrowing to the consumer. When that gets passed on to consumers, that's where you're seeing, again, that record shareholder profits. It's going up despite overall the market being deflated. So this inverse relationship, I think, really plays into a factor of like when stocks are risky, crypto is also relatively risky as well, but it's considered as an alternative asset versus the U.S. economy, whereas people see stocks as, well, if stocks are doing bad, that means that the U.S. economy is doing bad. If I think that the U.S. economy is doing bad, then maybe I should be getting into something that's not necessarily tied to the U.S. markets. That's where crypto and other alternative assets kind of come into play, where people see that as an alternative to what we would usually see.
You know, we've been talking about Bitcoin so much. I'm curious if you're watching any altcoins.
Any altcoins in particular? Well, unfortunately, I personally don't invest in crypto, but I'm always fascinated by what's going on with ETH. I'm also very fascinated with what's going on with Bitcoin in general, especially when I'm seeing what's happening with the Spot Bitcoin ETF. So we just saw that the DTCC is considering about 8 or 9 spot ETFs to come into market over the next couple of months. And with those ETFs coming into the market, that's going to allow for further liquidity and direct investment without having to own crypto assets in a physical wallet. So when that happens, honestly, that's just going to open up the market to crypto to more of the average investor, more of the lay investor. And personally, I remember when I first started coming onto these segments, you guys were asking, will Bitcoin ever reach the 50K mark? And I think that honestly, with the emergence of these spot Bitcoin ETFs, that's where you're going to see the rocket ship coming.
Something else you've been watching closely is the FTX bankruptcy developments. Talk to us about why you're watching those so closely and why you think that they're significant.
So, we also had another colleague come on earlier today talking about Sam Bankman-Fried taking the stand today. It'll be very interesting to see what he has to say, or kind of what the transcripts say after the fact. For me, the bankruptcy is very important because, as some of you have been following, or some of you have noticed, FTX originally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Bermuda. So some people kind of attributed that, or said immediately that means that FTX is gone entirely. I disagree. And the reason why is because Chapter 11 bankruptcy, let's keep in mind, is just a way for corporations to allow for restructuring, reorganization, and to pay back their loans or any sort of initial debts that they have to their borrowers. So what that means is, and especially if we look at what's been happening recently, that they've been selling off some of their coins, selling off some of or putting back onto the blockchain some of the stuff that they've had in their cold storage wallets. That means that they're looking to sell off some of those assets. And by selling off those assets, they can therefore pay off some of their debtors, and they can also hopefully be able to recoup some of those assets to pay off FTX users. The good news about that is that that's basically how they're going to be able to pay those individuals off. But it also means that when you're in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, that this is just a method of reorganization. So there is a chance that FTX might honestly come back with an entirely new leadership, depending on how this trial goes and depending on who gets convicted at the end of the day.
But isn't it sort of like Enron coming back? I mean, like the name has really. I don't know. If I call up my advisors and I'm like, it'd be a good idea. This is exchange FTX. You heard of it? They had problems before. I'm gonna put some money in it. I would suspect, even if it has new managers and everything, and it could be run out of Gary Gensler's home computer. Yet it's still kind of like, this might not be something that people will rush to. Goodwill, it might show up on accounting, but it also, there's something behind it, right? We see the value of the brand equity completely collapse, and this trial certainly doesn't help. Is that a realistic expectation, or is a more likely expectation that they chop it up into pieces, certain aspects such as licenses, if they had any software, et cetera, and dole those out to the highest bidder and just wrap it up and call it a day?
Again, both of those are absolutely a possibility. We've seen zombie companies, as I like to call them, come back from the grave before. I'm thinking about like recent bankruptcy scandals. The Boy Scouts of America, they're still around today, even though there was that entire scandal surrounding that. Some of back in 2008, 2009, with a lot of the companies that filed for bankruptcy, they just simply got merged into other corporations. And so they're essentially under a larger name. So if it gets chopped up and sold, I wouldn't be surprised if, for example, a larger player might come into play chop up those assets and take the company for its bits and pieces. I also think that there's always that possibility that, the name is definitely tarnished, but if they came back and they said, hey, we got rid of the guy who lied about assets, we've decided to put more stop controls in place so that way we have more trust and more reliability on behalf of our clients, then I think that there are some people who honestly might go back to FTX. Would I personally do it? No, but there's always that chance. There's always.
I mean, if they decide to go into real estate in Bahamas, then they got a leg up because apparently they're really good at picking out real estate.
They have some really lovely houses that Airbnb might be interested in purchasing.
Right, that could be a new business, and that kind of works out for everyone, doesn't it?
And also,
they have a reputation in that market.
Absolutely. And so the original drawing that I saw of FTX, I just wanted to add, you guys kind of missed the afro on that.
Oh,
right.
I thought he cut it,
He did clean it up a little bit for court.
He cleaned it up. But I appreciate the, that's quite a, he looks like, it's the classic messy, just woke up look on him. It's not quite an afro. It's sort of like a. I failed cosmetology school.
Victoria, we will add that to the collection of amazing drawings that have been debuted on this show. Thanks so much for joining us this morning and giving us your insight on the markets.
Thanks so much for having me.
That was Banríon Capital Management Chief Investment Strategist Victoria Bills. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll speak to a